also like we're just kind of direct. And some people view that as aggressive because we just come out and say something like, hey, we have that meeting at 2, so I need your work done by 1. Instead, some people would be like, could you get this done by 1 o'clock? Do you think you could get that done by 1 o'clock? But to an autistic person, saying like, do you think you could get this done by 1 o'clock is not the same as saying, we have to make sure this is done by 1 o'clock. Those are 2 different things. Hey, sunshine. I'm hoping that this will be a quick one this week, but I guarantee nothing because I have ADHD. So what I want to talk about today is the difference between infodumping, which is effectively an autistic love language, and over-explaining, which is a coping strategy that often comes from masking. So this came up because there's a Discord server I'm in, and somebody was apologizing for infodumping. And I was like, baby, you don't have to apologize for that. That's how we communicate. You're in a friendly space. We are neurodivergent here. And this person was like, oh, like I'm still kind of figuring out a lot about neurodivergence. So like this person is new to their diagnoses and like is learning, going through the beautiful process of figuring out which parts of life being stressful are because you are neurodivergent and your brain is wired differently and your operating system is not on the easy mode that most people's operating system is on. And there's grief with that, right? Like there's grief in understanding that a lot of the challenges that you have experienced in life are literally because other people don't understand you and because the world is set up for people who operate differently. And then you're just sort of like told to try harder, and that sucks. So it's freaking hard. And so if there's like grief and sadness and even anger involved in your unmasking process, that is super valid. It is very much like a grieving process. Okay, so all that to say that, I'm going to open up the message. Yeah, okay, so first she says, infodumping is something I'm trying to unlearn. And I was like, hey, don't change yourself. What are you doing? You don't have to do that. And then she said, I never thought of it like that, but it makes sense. I was lumping infodumping and over-explaining in together. And she went on to say, I find that often I over-explain things because that's just how I think, or sometimes from a place of anxiety if I am dealing with difficult people, family, healthcare, etc. And so when I'm teaching, for example, I feel I would get better at separating out what is good, manageable amount of info from the stacks of info my brain would like to hand out to people. So I'm obsessed with this, like the idea that autism in your brain is like, oh, I have prepared a lecture. Like, are we sitting down? Can I bring up my PowerPoint? I'm so ready to talk to you about all of ancient mythology has to say about turtles. That's my special interest. I will now infodump. And like for me, I'm like, I'm going to buckle up. Like, I'm so excited to hear everything about turtles. I'm obsessed. Maybe I can add something to the discussion. Maybe I'll just learn. When a bunch of autistics are together and we start infodumping about our interests, it is like, it's a beautiful concerto of stuff we love. This is how my partner communicates like about media and film. And sometimes he's like kind of a bummer to watch movies with because he'll be like, oh, this director did something I don't like. Or he'll be like, oh, this is super contrived, right? And then other times he just laughs his ass off and he's like, that's so goofy. I love it. So it's a mixed bag. For the most part, he is very self-aware. And he'll be like, is it okay that I'm roasting this film? And I'll be like, yeah, it's okay that you're roasting this film. His roasting of films has actually taught me a lot about films. I never knew anything about directors before I started dating him. Like, to me, a director was just like, I don't know, like the guy who directed it. You need a director for things. But similar to like how authors have a writing voice and a writing style, directors have a directorial style. And I never watched movies close enough to notice that. And this is something that came up in my interview with Libby a couple episodes ago where we were talking about horror. And I said that George Miller films, I can always trust that he's not going to put like gratuitous violence against women on screen. And so I know, like, no matter what it is, if it's George Miller, I can watch it. That's safe. Just like the way that we interact with the world and our hobbies and our special interests, that is a way that we communicate. It's It's why I use so much metaphor when I coach and when I teach, because like somebody who's a painter, for instance, if I can say something like the first draft of your story is like the sketch of a painting, that's going to click for them because they're going to be like, oh, that's right. Like my paintings do look really janky when they're just the sketch because I haven't put in like all the layers and added the shadow and the highlight and all this stuff. If someone is a songwriter, I'll be like, the first draft is when you're like kind of figuring out the notes and you're just sort of humming along and you're, maybe you know some of the rhymes, like some of the chorus, but you're still figuring out the verses. Being able to speak to the language, and it's not language, right? Because it is a language, but it's not like a language. I don't know. Hopefully you're picking up what I'm putting down there. But when I can speak the language of songwriting or of watercolor painting, I can connect directly to the part of that person's brain that is a painter or is a songwriter. And then I can say, writing the first draft of your book is just like this part. And that way I don't have to like start from scratch and say, well, the first draft of a book is going to be kind of messy. It's going to be this, it's going to be that. Because I have already gone into what they have spent hundreds of hours learning, and I can skip the whole preamble and be like, it's like this part of that process. I know people get like so down on calling it a superpower, but like it is a superpower to me that I am able to be like, stop. Like, tell me how you make your coffee. And they'll be like, well, first I do this and I do a pour over. I just use a drip coffee maker. And then I can turn whatever I'm trying to teach them into something about a coffee pot, right? It's magic. It's unhinged chaos. I love it. So info dumping is when we get to kind of go in on the special interest. Like somebody in like a Star Trek group will say something to them and they're like, oh, you messed with the wrong autistic bitch today, buddy. And they just start going in and they're like, oh, well, in season 2, episode 7, this happened and this happened and this happened. And Geordie LaForge did this. And then Miles O'Brien did this. And it's like, there's receipts. You don't want to mess with somebody who can info dump about Star Trek because you're going to be wrong. It's kind of like that. But it is like a love thing. So typically, you're not just going to go into work and somebody's going to say, oh, how was your weekend? And then you info dump about algal blooms at Lake Erie, or invasive zebra mussels. You'll be like, I had a pretty good weekend, hung out with family, right? Like there is a level of access to the info dump that people get. And that could be masking as well. Like people I don't know very well, I don't know if they want that info dump. But like when my partner sort of squares up on the couch and he goes, all right, I am locked in. Like I am so in love with him in this moment. And I know that he's going to say something that I don't know or really care about that much, about like the lore of space wolves in Warhammer 40K. But I'm so into the fact that he's so into it. And that's what info dumping is. Okay, so we have info dumping. Over-explaining. No, I don't like it. Okay, so this is going to relate to the subtext episode I did like 1,000 years ago. I don't even remember what episode that was. Hopefully the team will find it for you and link to it. So over-explaining is something that happens, I think, because autistic people are so commonly misunderstood. Because non-autistic people operate with subtext. So, and I used to do subtext a lot when I was in corporate. I would be like, hey, is there any update on this project? It's due tomorrow. The subtext of that was, you have to do this today and give it to me. But like, if you say it like that, it's too aggressive, right? So we had to do subtext. I don't like subtext. It is annoying and it is hard. And it's really irritating that things can be taken like 7 different ways because of how they're said. And sometimes people will read a tone into me and I'm like, there was no tone. I was informing you. Like, I don't know. I used to kind of just take a deep breath and then my ex would be like, are you okay? What's wrong? Not even, are you okay? He would go straight to, what's wrong? What's wrong? I'm like, I was breathing. I like forgot for a second and then I had to take a really big one. I shouldn't have to like be on the defensive with that. But over explaining tends to come from having to go on the defensive. So some things that autistic people do that do not have subtext, we ask clarifying questions. Like here's an example from my work. We got a bunch of thank you cards because in 2020, stores were shutting down, like customers were canceling orders. So we had a surplus of flowers, right? And those flowers are probably going to go in the garbage and be written off as a loss for the business. Or we could donate them to first responders and people in nursing homes and stuff like that. And then we can write them off as like charitable giving. We can do it as PR, right? So the greenhouse had a bunch of Easter lilies and we like gave them to a bunch of nursing homes. So a lot of people in the community got a nice, pretty flower, right? And I'm fucking jaded. So I'm like, sure, that was a financial decision. I wish I could go back to the place where I'm like, this is so pure. I love it. But alas, I saw too much of the actual like behind the scenes decision-making process. So we got some thank you cards from like, you know, adorable little old ladies who got an Easter lily. And they're like, this is so beautiful. I haven't gotten flowers on Easter in years. Like tragic things. Please go visit your elderly, everybody. So we got all these thank you cards and my boss like took a photo of them. He like arranged them nicely and took a nice top down, like flat lay photo, except people's addresses were in them. And I was like, we can't put that on social media. People's mailing addresses are on there. That's a breach of privacy. And he was like irritated with me and he's like, well, can I drop them off at your house? And then you can take a picture of them. And I said, why? Like, why is this so important to you? Which is a clarifying fucking question, right? If the owners of the company like really wanted to specifically call out the individual nursing homes in a Facebook post or something, I need that information. If we just want to kind of make a few posts to increase the press on all of this like charitable giving stuff that we did, I need to know that. Like, I need to know more layers. If I am going to, you can't just say, can I bring this stuff to your house and you just post it on social media? There's so much margin for me not correctly absorbing what you wanted from me in that scenario, which is why I will ask questions. Who is this for? What is the audience? Where is it going? To what end? What is our benefit from this? These are things that you have to ask in a marketing perspective. It's not that I go around like, what's in it for me? What's in it for me? But when you are making a post from a marketing department on behalf of a company, there's usually a reason. And he got like so pissed off at me that I was asking these questions and being like, why does it need to be now? And like, also I told him, no, you can't come to my house. Like, I don't want my boss coming to my house to give me work. That's a boundary I'm not willing to, no, we're not doing it. And he started fucking yelling at me on the phone and I hung up on him and then emailed his boss and told on him because nobody fucking talks to me like that. I've been applying for jobs lately. I'm a little worried. I'm a little concerned that I don't fit in with the company culture these days because I have dropped the masks, right? It's hard to work in a corporate environment based on subtext when you are an unmasked autistic, because you're just going to go in there with no subtext and be like, okay, why do we do that? Why do we do this? So we've got these clarifying questions. That's one thing that really disrupts subtext nation. And also like, we're just kind of direct. And some people view that as aggressive because we just come out and say something like, hey, we have that meeting at 2, so I need your work done by 1. Instead, some people would be like, could you get this done by 1 o'clock? Do you think you could get that done by 1 o'clock? But to an autistic person, saying like, do you think you could get this done by 1 o'clock is not the same as saying, we have to make sure this is done by 1 o'clock. Those are two different things. And so as a result of trying to navigate this whole subtexty life, we learn to over-explain. So we'll say something like, I need this done by 1 o'clock. And I'm not saying that to like rush you. I don't mean to rush you. We have to get it done because then there's this follow-up meeting at 2 and I need to make sure that we have time to go over everything together and I don't want you to miss your lunch. And so we get used to sort of like stacking all of the information so that nobody can get mad and so that nobody can read into subtext that isn't there or add their own subtext. So like the example of this person in the Discord server saying like, I'm still working on like how to filter out what is helpful to the communication and like what is actually relevant to the conversation versus what is like me adding extra levels of detail so that I don't feel anxious that I will be misunderstood. And honestly, like that's the question. You have to ask yourself, am I saying this because I don't want to be misunderstood? Then that is something to evaluate as over-explaining. And you can actually just stop midway through and be like, do you need all this extra info or are you good with what I said? You can ask. We do that in my house all the time. Like sometimes my partner will say something and then he's like, that could have sounded dismissive. I want to make sure that it didn't seem dismissive to you. And I'm like, no, you're good. I'm picking up what you're putting down. I get it. And then other times we could say something and I'll be like, hey, make sure you scoop the litter box today. And like, he'll forget. And then if he's in bed and I'm like, I really want that litter box scooped today, I will just go scoop it. And then he's worried that I'm mad about it. And I'm like, no, at this point, if I really wanted you to do it before you went to bed, I would ask you to get up and do it. My desire to have it done is greater than my desire that you're the one who does it. And so like sometimes that's fine. Last night, I did not do that. And then this morning I asked him to scoop the litter box. So a lot of this, and again, we're both autistic. So that helps because we both know that we have come from this background of having to over-explain and having to navigate the subtext. And we're both like still learning to unmask and to access that more like just direct communication part of ourselves. So there's a lot of just like clarifying, like, hey, did that come out okay? Did you get what I was saying? We good? And that's fine. So I think that's basically it. Like info dump away. If you're not sure people want to hear the info dump, you can ask. You can be like, hey, I know a lot about the lore of Star Wars, the Clone Wars television show. Do you want to hear about that? And if they do, they can say yes. And if they don't, they can say, no, I'm more like a casual fan. I don't really care about the deep lore. And then you can skip it. Like, and they don't even need to explain that much to you if they don't want to. It can be as simple as like, no thanks. And then you can go find somewhere else to info dump. Like go to Reddit. Just be like, hey, here's some lore I found. Go to Tumblr. Tumblr's great for lore. Threads is great. I really do love Threads because you can just kind of go off on like a little tangent. You can be like, hey, here's my special interest. I'm going to tell you some stuff today. And then other people will chime in and be like, I didn't know this. Did you also know this part? I've really tapped something in Threads where I missed a lot of 80s movies somehow. Like the movies that most people grew up watching. I'm like, why didn't I grow up watching these? So I've been like posting more about like 80s movies and being like, what are the recommendations that you have? And I'm learning a lot about like what are considered the essential viewing films of the 80s, as well as like sometimes people come in here and they're like, no, I hate this movie. It's really bad. And then other people are like, I can't believe you think that. And so I get to like watch other people talk about things that they're really interested in. And I love it because my autism is anthropological. And I'm like, I am so fascinated by the way that people talk about film, as evidenced by like my heart eyes when I talk about my boyfriend talking about film because he's adorable. But yeah, Threads lends itself well to that. Tumblr. Like I really love cooking, but it's not really my niche. So I've started putting stuff on my Patreon of like how to cook without a recipe. Here's what I made for breakfast and like the basics of how to make it yourself. Because that's something that has come up for me in like my neurodivergent spaces, especially with autistic people, is like, I don't know how to cook without a recipe. Like when they're using a recipe, they're not really sure why things are the way that they are, which I think comes back to like clarifying questions in the autistic neurotype. Like the reason it didn't work because you omitted the flour is because the flour was needed for a particular purpose, not just for, I don't know, adding some gluten to this previously gluten-free thing. And I think conversation is kind of like that too. Like I need a recipe. I need a recipe for this conversation. I need to make sure that I understand all of the components of it. And when you unmask, you can start just being yourself. And if people don't like it, they're allowed to say like, hey, I don't really want to learn about Batman right now. And that's fine. Then the rejection sensitivity might come in. You might be like, they didn't want to hear about Batman, and that means I should never talk about Batman. That's too far. Not true. It's just not the time and the place. And that's a thing that like you can't just check the weather and be like, is today the day somebody wants me to talk about Batman? It's something that you navigate in each relationship and in each conversation. And you can just say like, hey, can I infodump about this? Or, you know, if you're on Facebook and somebody leaves a comment that's this long, a giant long, multiple paragraphs Facebook comment, you're like, oh, that's an infodump. I'm going to bookmark that one, come back to it when I have the energy. Like, infodumping is great. Over-explaining, you don't have to. You don't have to. And also, one more over-explaining story, and then I'll stop. In my abusive marriage, I would really over-explain a lot, because if there were like any holes in the argument, or like not even arguments, but if there was anything where he could like twist it around and make something my fault, or be like, well, it's okay that I did this bad thing because you did this thing that annoyed me the other day and I never told anybody about it. And I'm like, this is weird. Like, it's weird that you're keeping track of stuff to like throw me under the bus for in a completely unrelated conversation. And the mental and emotional abuse in that relationship was so bad that I would not start a conversation unless I knew I would be safe the whole time. Like, so if it was a dissenting opinion from his, or like me asking for something, it was like lawyer proof, like absolutely airtight, so that there was not a way for him to come around and be like, no, you asked me wrong. You did this poorly, so I'm not going to give you what you asked for. Just weird, like weird and exhausting. And I, for one, am tired of over-explaining myself. So I'm kind of getting used to the block button, where if somebody's like committed to misunderstanding me, I just block them. Like, no, I don't need to try again when you could have tried in the first place to see where I was coming from. So there's that for you. You can block people in real life too. You can stop talking to them. So there we go. That's infodumping versus over-explaining. New announcement, big announcement. Okay, so this episode's coming out on September 27th, which means that our next episode is going to be the first one to feature Patreon supporters in like the credits. Everybody's going to get shout outs. So I have started fundraising on Patreon in support of the podcast and my work in general, because I believe in an economy where autistic, queer, chronically ill people keep their money in the community. So if you would like to share a few dollars into the community to help me take care of myself and my household, and also continue to hire other chronically ill, disabled, queer creatives, there's so many tiers you can start. You can be a $3 a month Patreon supporter. I think there's a tier for $9 a month. That one comes with a sticker. There are a couple $25 a month tiers. There's a $50 a month tier. So this really is kind of just vibes based, like pay what you can. And there is some merch on a couple of the tiers for people who like merch, because I love merch, right? So there is a track where you can get all writing related merch or all anti-hustle related merch. And those are both the $25 tiers. So every 3 months consistently that you are a patron at that level, you will get a new piece of merch, with 4 total over a year of being a patron. Super excited about that. And yeah, I am creating the autistic queer economy. I mean, I'm not creating it, but I'm trying to create a little corner of it for myself, because I want to do more stuff where I just focus on bringing attention and awareness to our autistic lives and autistic creativity and neurodivergence as a whole. And the best way for me to do that is to just make sure that my basic bills are paid, so that I can focus more on meeting you where you are and giving you what you need. That's my dream. I am tired of hustling and trying to like sell one particular thing at a time. Like that, it's not really good for the ADHD, because I constantly have new shit going on, right? So this was a very long-winded ask for support. But if you love this podcast, please become a Patreon supporter. At the very least, you get your name in the credits. And at the most, you get some merch and my eternal love and devotion, which is pretty hot. Okay, love you guys. I will see you in October, and we are going to talk about something spooky. Please tell me what you want to see next, because I feel like October should have a theme. And it should be spooky. Okay, love you. Bye.